This is a news on Baktyor Sanovan. Let's go through the main headlines. Hezbollah and Israel agreed to a ceasefire that takes effect today at 4 p.m. local time. European Union leaders gather for a summit in Brussels where discussions on Ukraine and security take place. And UK politician Andy Burnham wins a local election, paving way to challenge current Prime Minister Keir Starmer. Israel and Iran-backed Hezbollah have agreed to a ceasefire beginning at 4 p.m. local time on Friday, a senior U.S. official told Reuters after hostilities between them had escalated sharply overnight in Lebanon. The official said U.S. and Qatari negotiators brokered the deal with assistance from Iran. The intensification of violence in Lebanon strained the U.S.-Iranian interim agreement signed on Wednesday to end the wider war in the Middle East. The ceasefire announcement comes after a deadly overnight exchange between Israel and Hezbollah that raised fears of a renewed escalation in Lebanon. Efforts to revive U.S.-Iran nuclear talks have hit a pause in Switzerland as trust issues and rising regional tensions cloud a fragile 60-day diplomatic roadmap. At the same time, the International Atomic Energy Agency says it's ready to step in and help verify any future agreement, but the path forward remains uncertain.
Talks aimed at easing tensions between the United States and Iran have entered a new phase of uncertainty after scheduled negotiations were postponed in Switzerland. The head of the International Atomic Energy Agency, Rafael Mariano Grossi, welcomed an initial memorandum between the two sides. He said the agency is ready to support the process, especially on verification of Iran's nuclear program.
And now it's for us to sit down with our American colleagues, our Iranian colleagues, and start formulating the concrete steps that will have to be taken. So I think it's good that the memorandum is there. And now the technical work starts.
According to reports, the draft agreement allows up to 60 days of negotiations toward a final deal. Iran would need to confirm it is not seeking nuclear weapons. However, tensions remain high. Iranian parliamentary spokesperson Ebrahim Rezaiei expressed strong doubts about US commitments, pointing to past breakdowns in agreements.
The two wars that were imposed on us over the past year both occurred while we were in the middle of negotiations with the Americans. Therefore, in Tehran, we are also preparing ourselves for the possibility of another war. We do not believe what the Americans say, and we act based on our own calculations.
The next round of discussions was expected to take place at the Bergenstock resort in Switzerland, but Swiss officials confirmed the meeting has been postponed. US Vice President J.D. Vance also cancelled his planned travel. A White House spokesperson said the logistics of the talks have been difficult and unpredictable, leaving the future of negotiations unclear. Meanwhile, increased naval activity was reported near the Strait of Hormuz, a key global shipping route, adding to concerns over regional stability.
Diplomatic efforts to end the war are once again in focus. While Kiev says it's open to talks, it's also calling on Europe to take stronger and more decisive action. Against this backdrop, Ukraine's leadership is urging Western allies to increase pressure on Russia.
Putin wants to get everything we have burned. He is a madman and the partners get it. Ukraine is ready for negotiations with him despite that. But Europe has to shift into gear for us to have a strong position, to commit fully on sanctions without loopholes, on confiscation without exceptions, and on funding Ukraine.
2 people were killed and 2 injured in Russian strikes on Ukraine's Sumy region, with 9 more wounded in Kharkiv, including children. Separately, a drone attack hit the Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant's workshop overnight, causing damage, but no casualties reported, Russian officials say. The strikes come after Ukrainian drone attacks on Moscow, including a major oil refinery hit that injured at least 16 people and disrupted flights. President Volodymyr Zelensky called the strikes a response to Russia's attack on a Kiev monastery and said if Ukraine is going to burn, then Moscow will burn too. Moscow has threatened large-scale strikes on Ukraine on a regular basis. NATO members Germany and UK have announced new military aid packages for Ukraine. German Defense Minister Boris Pistorius said Berlin will allocate $200 million for the procurement of guided missiles. Britain has also pledged to supply Ukraine with 150,000 domestically produced drones and new air defense systems. According to officials, the British assistance package will be financed through proceeds generated from frozen Russian assets. Debate continues within the European Union over a new package of sanctions against Russia. However, differences remain among member states on several key issues. Against this backdrop, Bulgaria has openly voiced its concerns ahead of the latest discussions.
Bulgaria has already expressed certain reservations about these sanctions because we have already stated our position that we will not allow sanctions that harm and pose a risk to the Bulgarian economy. Here I can point out the risk to the functioning of Lukoil. I can point out risks for supplying the capital's metro with spare parts. We will assess what the risk is. That is why there will still be talks, very serious ones. And if we see a public risk for the operation of Lukoil Neftochim Burgas, we will want it to be excluded from the sanctions package.
Meanwhile, in Brussels, alongside discussions on Ukraine and security, European Union leaders are confronting another familiar challenge: the bloc's budget. As the Brussels summit continues, divisions are emerging over how the EU should fund its priorities for the next 7 years.
The European Commission has proposed a budget of €2 trillion for the 2028 to 2034 period, covering everything from support for farmers and regional development to technology projects and student exchange programs. But the proposal has already drawn criticism from both sides of the debate. Wealthier member states, which contribute more than they receive, and poorer countries, which rely more heavily on EU funding, are expected to clash over spending priorities and how the money should be raised. Reaching agreement is traditionally difficult, with all 27 member states required to approve the budget unanimously. While no major decisions are expected at this stage, leaders are set to indicate their preferences on possible new EU revenue streams. Those discussions are intended to help the incoming Irish EU presidency prepare a revised compromise proposal for October. The budget debate comes as leaders continue broader summit discussions that have also included Ukraine, relations with China, and the renewal of EU sanctions against Russia for a further 12 months, the first such annual extension.
The European Commission is facing sharp criticism after inviting Taliban representatives to Brussels for talks on returning Afghan migrants whose asylum claims were rejected. The move has sparked a debate over security, migration policy, and whether engagement with the Taliban undermines the EU's commitment to human rights. Here is more.
The European Commission is facing backlash after inviting Taliban officials to Brussels for talks on deporting rejected Afghan asylum seekers. Commission officials say the discussions are focused on practical issues, especially migration and deportation procedures. The planned meeting follows technical talks held in Afghanistan earlier this year. EU officials insist the invitation does not amount to formal recognition of the Taliban government, which seized power in Afghanistan in 2021 after the withdrawal of NATO forces. According to the Commission, 20 EU and Schengen countries requested consultations on the issue. Officials say only a small percentage of Afghans ordered to leave Europe have actually been returned. Many of those targeted for deportation have criminal convictions or are considered security risks. But the invitation has triggered a political backlash. Belgian Foreign Minister Maxime Prévost says he personally opposes hosting Taliban representatives and rejects any formal recognition of the regime. However, he acknowledged that Belgium has limited influence because Brussels hosts major EU institutions. Human rights groups and critics warn the visit could give the Taliban international legitimacy, despite ongoing concerns over the treatment of women and girls in Afghanistan. The Commission maintains that any return decisions must comply with EU and international law, including fundamental rights protections.
To discuss the political, legal and moral implications of this decision, we're joined by Dr. Aryan Sharifi, independent analyst who joins us from Washington, D.C. Mr. Sharifi, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Thank you. Mr. Sharifi, why has the European Commission decided to engage directly with Taliban representatives despite refusing to officially recognize the Taliban government? Is this invitation primarily about migration management, or does it signal a broader shift in the EU's approach toward Afghanistan?
I think it's a combination of both. Look, it's a conundrum really for the international community when it comes to engagement with the Taliban. On the one hand, the group has been in power almost for close to 5 years now, and they're not only in power, they're in full control of Afghanistan's territory, something that really the country didn't have over the past 5 decades. So the Taliban are there, they're in control, they're in power. On the other hand, the Taliban have not really been acting as a government. Still, there is no constitution. Basic rights of the majority of the people, especially women and girls, are stepped upon. Issues of human rights exist there, and a host of other matters that actually distinguish the Taliban from a normal government. So the international community is really perplexed, particularly the Europeans. If people are in power, to engage with them or to not engage with them. If they don't engage with them, 5 years has passed. It's a big country there. There's issues of migration, there are issues of economic development, there are issues of human rights, security matters, and issues of counterterrorism. There's a host of matters that countries, especially Europe, really needs to engage with somebody in Afghanistan. But on the other hand, if they do engage, then all this entire track record of the Taliban with regard to human rights and women's rights is really preventing that. So in my view, it really is a conundrum.
Dr. Sharifi, some critics argue that hosting Taliban officials in Brussels grants them political legitimacy. Do you agree with that assessment?
To an extent, it does, yes. I mean, of course, this is not any formal recognition of the Taliban government. It's none of that. But to officially for the EU to invite the Taliban to Brussels, yes, of course, it acknowledges them as people in charge. It acknowledges them as de facto authorities and government. So it does give them some level of diplomatic recognition. Now, my belief is that the world really does need to get engaged with the Taliban, but that engagement will have to really be conditional. Now, I'm not saying conditioned on those grand big ideas that we had under the Republic of building a democracy. That might be a little too ambitious for now. But conditional on simple and small steps that could actually probably even gradually bring the Taliban into to act as a real government. Issues of starting to build a constitution, issues of slowly, at least, and gradually moving towards granting the basic rights of the citizens. So what I'm saying is that engagement may be inevitable because the world will have to have an address in Afghanistan to talk to. They cannot completely ignore a country of about 40 million people forever. It's difficult to do so. But at the same time, if you fully engage without bringing any conditions in there, that actually risks solidifying the current type of governance that the Taliban are controlling.
So how does the controversy reflect the growing pressure on European governments to tighten migration and deportation policies?
I mean, that's a big problem. How could the EU really tighten migration policies especially with regard to Afghanistan, when they see there is a government that does pose some level of security threat to some people? It's a government that does not recognize the basic rights of the Afghan people, particularly 50% of the society, which is women. It's a government that whose policies and whose engagement has actually led to almost a total isolation of the country for over 5 years now, which has translated into severe economic and humanitarian issues. So. It is tough, I would say, for European governments to completely tighten migration, disallow Afghans from coming in, and at the same time, looking into the situation there and seeing that, disparity, economic disparity, security disparity, rights disparity, everything is sort of in shambles there. I mean, there isn't really an easy answer to that. Which is why I think it is important for European countries to engage with the Taliban, to start talking about issues of migration, but at the same time, those engagements and that gradual engagement needs to be based on a certain conditions that would slowly and hopefully turn that into a real government in the country.
Mr. Sharifi, even some EU member states argue that deportations are necessary for security reasons. How should security concerns be balanced against human rights obligations?
I mean, I've worked for much of my career in counterterrorism, I do understand the weaknesses. I do understand the threats being posed. I'll tell you this: the vast majority of Afghan immigrants in Europe are just normal people who are, seeking either a better life, who are seeking maybe the basic rights that they can actually not get in Afghanistan, or who are actually fleeing from security threats there. So to think that, security threats to Europe might be diminished by deporting Afghan refugees, that is really not sound counterterrorism argument in my professional opinion. Instead of that, I mean, it is better to, if they're concerned with regard to security, so the origin of insecurity and terrorism is back actually in South Asia. Isn't that better to work with governments in South Asia? Pakistan is a major hub of security threats, particularly of terrorism. Current Afghanistan is the same thing. To blame all of that on a number of Afghan refugees, I don't think that is counterterrorism policy. I think that's more politically driven.
Dr. Sharifi, what impact could this decision have on the EU's credibility as a global advocate for democracy, human rights, and the rule of law?
I mean, if they push for deporting Afghan refugees, as I just mentioned before, they are the vast majority, 99.999% of them are people who are either fleeing from security threats, either who are looking for educational opportunities because their children cannot have an education in Afghanistan, or who are simply there to actually look for better economic opportunities. These are the people who are there to actually live a normal life and contribute to the society that are there. Now, if you blame insecurity on them, if you blame terrorism on them, and at the same time you push them back into a society where they will be facing security threats and they will be facing no opportunities for education and economic opportunities, so that actually tarnishes the EU's image as an advocate of human rights and opportunities in the world. Again, let me reiterate, I think some of the voices in Europe that are calling for deportation, that are calling for tightening of immigration procedures, those are really not rooted in serious concerns over security. I think those are, vastly politically driven, and those should not really become official policies of the EU.
So, Belgium's Foreign Minister Maxime Prévost has openly opposed the visit. What does this disagreement reveal about divisions between EU institutions and member states when it comes to engagement with controversial actors such as the Taliban?
I mean, I think it's not only Belgium. I think that there are a lot of voices within some of the countries that are actually for engagement. So Europe is kind of divided the voices in Europe, both official and unofficial voices over engagement with the Taliban. On the one hand, of course, the need for engagement is there. We just talked about. These guys are the de facto rulers of the country, but at the same time, unconditional engagement will risk solidifying the current status of governance in that country, which is not something the international community as a whole, and particularly the European capitals want to see. It will have to be seen as to how this thing is really going to emerge. I think even outside of Europe, there are increasing calls for engagement, at least pragmatic engagement with the Taliban. If you have noticed the last Security Council resolution that renewed the mandate of the United Nations, their unanimous mandate, that in essence indirectly calls for further and gradual pragmatic engagement with the Taliban. So given the fact that the Taliban are in power, the Taliban seem to be remaining in power in that country, I don't see any real political or military opposition oppose them. These guys are going to be there for the foreseeable future. The soundest policy for the international community, and here specifically we're talking about the European Union, the soundest policy is to start engagement, to start a pragmatic and systematic engagement, but with condition. I mean, if you look into individual European countries over the past 5 years, most of them have been engaging with the Taliban. Some even have opened their embassies in Kabul. They have not sent ambassadors, but they have diplomatic staff in Kabul. Instead of that sporadic way of engagement, it is better to systematize that. Start with a systematic engagement, but that engagement would actually be conditional. And that kind of signals to the Taliban as well, that if they are going to behave, that if they are going to reform, and if they are going to listen to the needs and wants of the Afghan people and of the international community, that recognition might actually be at the end of the tunnel. For now, my field research, I do conduct field research in Afghanistan, in Central Asia, in Iran, and my field research shows that the Taliban are also worried about not ever getting diplomatically recognized by the international community, no matter what they do. So if there is a systematic engagement and conditional engagement on the part of the EU and perhaps even the larger, broader international community, I think that very clearly will signal to the Taliban that if they're going to behave, and if they're going to reform, and if they're going to eventually turn into a legitimate government of Afghanistan, then there is actually light at the end of the tunnel. That would be my advice to the European Union.
In your view, what precedent might this decision set for the EU's future dealings with other de facto authorities or unrecognized governments around the world?
I mean, another example, a very good example is Syria. I mean, look, the EU is engaged with Syria. Almost all European capitals are, in direct engagement with Syria. The Syrian president had official trips to many European capitals. The background of this current Syrian authorities is pretty much exactly the same background as the Taliban had. The only difference is that the new government in Syria began reforming. The new government in Syria, when it got to power, Ahmad al-Shara and his team really started shifting from an insurgent organization into a legitimate government of Syria. And this is something that Taliban have not done. And this is why I'm saying that, it is not that the EU and European governments individually have not really gotten into diplomatic engagements with regimes that kind of resemble a past like that of the Taliban in Afghanistan. It is actually that when those governments in those new countries that are moving towards reform, and if they're moving towards shifting from an insurgent, from even a terrorist organization into a legitimate government apparatus, if they're building laws, if they're opening the political sphere to the country, and if they are respecting and ensuring basic rights of the citizenry, then the precedent is already there. So engagement would not have an issue. So I think if engagement on the part of the European Union with the Taliban would be systematic, would be calculated, and would be conditional, and of course gradual based on those conditions, I think that would actually set a good precedent, because you might see similar situation elsewhere in the world, and setting the precedents that the EU will be willing to engage with a government with a very dark past, but a government that is actually willing to reform, a government that is willing to make itself aligned with the demands of modern society, then there's no problem in engagement with them.
Dr. Aryan Sharifi, thank you very much for talking to A News and sharing your valuable insights on this highly sensitive and controversial issue. We greatly appreciate your time and expertise. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. A so-called brotherhood between two neighbors and allies appears increasingly strained. For years, Ukraine and Poland stood side by side against a common threat, with Warsaw emerging as one of Kiev's strongest supporters following Russia's full-scale invasion. But beneath the rhetoric of solidarity, tensions have been growing.
Ukraine and Poland maintain a strong strategic partnership against Russia, but that does not necessarily mean that the two countries like each other.
The unconditional solidarity is basically gone.
Little brother. Ironically, this term has been used for Ukraine by both its ally Poland and its adversary Russia. In the current strain in Polish-Ukrainian relations, it raises a deeper question. Is Poland a genuine partner, or another regional power reshaping Ukraine's future under the language of brotherhood? Historical references to the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth and ideas of a greater Poland continue to shape perceptions of the region, with Western Ukrainian territories such as Galicia and Volhynia sometimes viewed through the lens of historical Polish influence. Years of war have left Ukraine economically weakened and strategically exposed, turning it into a space where competing powers project their interests. Russia does so through force, Poland, more subtly, through economics, politics, and historical leverage. Under strong domestic farming lobbies, Poland has repeatedly restricted Ukrainian grain and agricultural exports and blocked key border crossings.
Economically, their interests differ. For instance, in 2024, Polish farmers blocked the border with Ukraine in protest against the grain imports from the war-torn country.
These measures have hit Ukrainian farmers hard, especially after Ukraine lost access to much of its Black Sea export routes. Inside Poland, the presence of millions of Ukrainian refugees has also become a defining social and economic factor. A 2026 law began rolling back parts of the emergency support system introduced after 2022, gradually reducing certain welfare, healthcare, and education benefits for Ukrainian refugees, while maintaining limited protection for vulnerable groups.
Poland took the largest absolute share of refugees, roughly 1 million Ukrainians under temporary protection, most part, of course, women and children, and Ukrainians make up about 78% of all foreign nationals in the country right now. That is a very, very high concentration. And of course, for a labor market, it is a difficult issue.
Reports estimate that around 1 million Ukrainians, whether they're refugees or labor migrants, are currently living in Poland. And they definitely play a very important role in Polish economic life because they're representing around 5% of the Polish labor force, and they're estimated to contribute around 2.7% of the country's GDP. So they're definitely not useless.
Tensions also extend into Ukraine's path toward European Union membership. Poland publicly supports Ukraine's integration, yet consistently attaches conditions tied to agriculture, transport, and historical disputes.
Poland matters very much for the European Union. It's the logistics hub, the road everything travels through. It spent years casting itself as Ukraine's #1 champion. And in the end, enlargement requires everyone to say yes. Poland lines up with Brussels.
Others have gone further, warning that historical grievances, particularly those linked to the Volhynia massacres and the legacy of the Ukrainian insurgent army, could become grounds for political obstruction in accession talks.
Volyn is not a backdrop to Polish-Ukrainian policy. It's the instrument of it. The 1943-1944 massacre, where roughly 100,000 ethnic Poles were killed, is explicitly seen as genocide in Poland. Ukraine has historically resisted that framing. In 2024, Deputy Prime Minister of Poland said that Warsaw would not admit Ukraine to the EU until the Volyn question is resolved. And Nawrocki, he said that he could not envision Ukraine in either the EU or NATO until important civilizational issues for Poland are resolved.
The result is not open confrontation, but structured pressure that shapes Kiev's options across trade, labor, memory, and integration.
And we'll continue with the main stories of the day after a short break. Stay tuned.
We are in Seoul, the Republic of Korea, a country that for more than 70 years has lived in the shadow of unfinished war.
I was 18 years old when the Korean War broke out. My two brothers were dragged out to the front yard of the village public hall and forcibly subjected to a trial under the name of People's Trial.
The military demarcation line, created after the Korean War, became a massive wall, preventing separated families from meeting.
Less than a kilometer away lies North Korea.
지금 우리 무장력은 그 어떤 위기에도 대응할 철저한 준비가 되어 있으며
Подписанный сегодня договор предусматривает в том числе оказание взаимной помощи в случае агрессии против одного из участников.
Russian-Ukraine war now is connected with North Korean participation in Russian army.
The complete denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula is the only outcome that we will find acceptable.
If the U.S. persists in such hostile policy towards the DPRK, there will never be denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula.
Looking back on the past is important to learn from experience. It is like a chronicle, page by page. War, Auschwitz, love, humor.
What was the atmosphere like in your home? Perhaps even a particular smell that you associated with?
The smell of the theater. Soviet Union had many shortcomings, and the world we live in today gives us little reason for optimism.
Den här gången vill jag följa en berättelse som inte bärs av monument utan av minnet. Den kulturella berättelsen om västra Azerbajdzjan. Jag heter Mikael Silkeberg. Jag är fotograf och dokumentärfilmare.
Hüseyn Əli xan tərəfindən tikilən Göy məsciddir. Bugünkü görüntüsü olan Təpəbaşı məhəlləsindəki məsciddir.
UNESCO beskriver den azerbajdzjanska ashik-konsten som en syntes av poesi, berättande dans samt vokal- och instrumentalmusik, en symbol för kulturell identitet och en väktare av språket.
İlk növbədə mən qeyd etmək istərdim ki, Qərbi Azərbaycan aşıq mühitləri ümumən Azərbaycan aşıq sənətinin inkişafına çox mühüm dərəcədə təsir göstərmişdir.
Sübhana baş endirir.
Bizim Qərbi Azərbaycan xassasılığını öyrənəndə biz mütləq qarmaqlı ornamentləri öyrənməliyik.
Mənim doğum şəhadətnaməm Dərələyəz mahalının Qovuşuq kəndində verilib. Mən kəndimə qayıtmaq istəyirəm.
Welcome back to A News. A by-election in the UK could have wider political consequences. Andy Burnham has returned to Parliament after winning the Makerfield vote, strengthening his position within Labour and adding pressure on Prime Minister Keir Starmer. Our correspondent Zaina Farizada has the details.
Voters in the constituency of Makerfield have elected Andy Burnham as a new Member of Parliament. The Greater Manchester mayor won the by-election with almost 55% of the vote, defeating the right-wing Reform UK candidate and returning to Westminster after nearly a decade away. Burnham won nearly 25,000 votes, while Reform UK secured 35% of the vote. Other parties trailed behind. Speaking to supporters in his new constituency, Burnham said he wants to lay out a new path for Britain and added that Labour needs to make life affordable again. The result is likely to have consequences far beyond Makerfield. Andy Burnham is one of Labour's most recognisable figures and has long been viewed as a potential contender for leading the party. The result now adds to the pressure on Prime Minister Keir Starmer after a series of setbacks for the Labour Party. He was quick to congratulate Burnham on the result, saying voters had chosen Labour's message of hope and optimism over division. He also said he will stand in any leadership contest if one is triggered. Former Health Secretary Wes Streeting, who resigned over Starmer's leadership, said Burnham's victory showed Labour could still win public support but needed to change to do so. Reform UK leader Nigel Farage said voters supported Burnham to remove Starmer from the Labour leadership. Burnham's return to Westminster has now triggered an election for a new Greater Manchester mayor, which is expected on 3rd July. Zaina Farizada, A News, Manchester, United Kingdom.
The Islamic Development Bank's annual meeting in Baku has officially concluded. Over 4 days, global financial leaders and experts locked in multi-billion-dollar deals with a heavy focus on infrastructure and emergency health funding for vulnerable regions.
After 4 days of intense panels, networking and high-level strategy, the ISDB annual meeting here in Baku have officially wrapped up. The chairmanship has now been handed over to Burkina Faso, with the next major gathering set for Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. But before the curtains came down, today's sessions focused heavily on practical development solutions, specifically how to secure sustainable funding for vulnerable communities under immense pressure. Let's take a look at what Hannah Balki from the World Health Organization had to say about their ongoing collaboration with the ISDB.
A clear example was what happened in 2024-25, where polio emerged in Gaza. Because of a robust wastewater surveillance program that existed, we were able to detect the circulation of the polio virus. That signal allowed us to round up a very robust response to stop the circulation of polio so that it does not go out of the area, the geographical area where it emerged, or re-emerged literally after 25 years. We were able to vaccinate 600,000 children, a little bit less than that, in 3 cycles with the polio vaccine, and that was a critical example of how we mitigated the resurgence of a pathogen.
Now shifting gears to regional connectivity, the spotlight turned back to the Middle Corridor. Experts made it clear today that unlocking the full potential of this trade route requires a whole new approach to financing, because these regional projects are so capital intensive. Multilateral development banks like the ISDB and the Asian Development Bank are looking to create dedicated working groups. And as expected, the summit closed with a major wave of multi-million and billion-dollar agreements. We saw critical funding secured for infrastructure like a €150 million highway project in Turkey and key industrial expansion in Bahrain. But it wasn't just about roads and bridges. There was a heavy focus on humanitarian aid and sustainability, including a $37 million solar power project for Palestine, emergency relief for Sudan, and the landmark $1 billion framework agreement with Burkina Faso to boost their priority economic sector. And that's a wrap up from us. For intense day of covering this major event came to an end today. I am Leyla Rahimli alongside my cameraman İlkin Mehtiev for A News.
Azerbaijan is expanding its diplomatic presence in Europe with the establishment of a new embassy in Portugal. President Ilham Aliyev has signed an order creating the diplomatic mission in Lisbon, while the Cabinet of Ministers has been tasked with arranging its funding and operational support. The Foreign Ministry will also finalize the embassy structure and staffing. The move is expected to strengthen political, economic and cultural ties between Azerbaijan and Portugal. Now to the Democratic Republic of the Congo, where authorities report the continued spread of the Ebola virus. It comes as the World Health Organization says more than 70 medics have been infected with the virus. Chris Ochamringa has more in this report from Kinshasa.
Health authorities in the Democratic Republic of Congo say the Ebola virus has continued spreading in the eastern and northeastern parts of the country. Most cases of the contagious disease are in Ituri province, which has been plagued by insecurity for years. Health workers have struggled to trace patients due to ongoing insecurity and the area's remoteness. That, coupled with a mistrust from some community members who do not believe the disease exists, has hampered response efforts. The head of the Africa Centers for Disease Control and Prevention recently warned that the Ebola outbreak could be the worst ever if these issues are not addressed quickly. The government has acknowledged the need to step up containment efforts. Authorities are also calling for more funding for medical equipment to test samples, strengthen surveillance, and set up Ebola treatment centers. They recently launched an appeal for $518 million to stop the disease from spreading across the African continent, but has so far received $100 million. The Ebola outbreak circulating in the DRC is caused by the Bundibujo strain, for which there is currently no approved vaccine or specific medicine. Medics are relying on rehydration and supportive care to treat patients who were brought in early for treatment. At least 6 to 7 patients have recovered and been discharged from hospitals since the outbreak was declared on May 15. Chris Ochamringa for A News in Kinshasa.
After the break, we'll continue with the main stories shaping the region. Stay tuned.
We are in Seoul, the Republic of Korea, a country that for more than 70 years has lived in a shadow of unfinished war.
I was 18 years old when the Korean War broke out. My two brothers were dragged out to the front yard of the village public hall and forcibly subjected to a trial under the name of People's Trial.
The military demarcation line, created after the Korean War, became a massive wall, preventing separated families from meeting.
Less than a kilometer away lies North Korea.
지금 우리 무장력은 그 어떤 위기에도 대응할 철저한 준비가 되어 있으며
Подписанный сегодня договор предусматривает в том числе оказание взаимной помощи в случае агрессии против одного из участников.
Russian-Ukraine war now is connected with North Korean participation in Russian army.
The complete denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula is the only outcome that we will find acceptable.
If the U.S. persists in such hostile policy towards the DPRK, there will never be denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula.
On World Business, we meet the boardroom leaders making market-moving decisions. And find out how leaders are dealing with continuous technological disruption.
As America sleeps, Europe is waking, and the East has begun its day. A News is right here at the center, bringing you the latest stories as they break. I'm Nadia Jani, here with you each weekday morning to share latest world news and the stories shaping our region. Across all platforms and wherever you get your news, we explore the context behind the big headlines. Live from Baku, I bring you a diverse mix of regional and international news, sport and politics for you, an audience that wants a bit more. So join me Monday to Friday for the latest headlines, expert analysis and live updates from around the world. Around the globe and live from Baku, this is Daybreak here on A News.
Looking back on the past is important to learn from experience. It is like a chronicle, page by page. War, Auschwitz, love, humor.
What was the atmosphere like in your home? Perhaps even a particular smell that you associated with?
The smell of the theater. Soviet Union had many shortcomings, and the world we live in today gives us little reason for optimism.
Welcome back. Now turn to the main developments across the region. Armenia's opposition Strong Armenia bloc has appealed to the Constitutional Court seeking to invalidate the results of the June 7th parliamentary elections. According to Armenian media reports, the bloc is asking the court either to annul the election results or order a second round of voting. In a statement, the Constitutional Court said it will decide on the admissibility of the appeal within 2 days of receiving the petition. Under the final results announced by the Central Electoral Commission, the ruling Civil Contract Party secured 49.7% of the vote, giving it a parliamentary majority, while Strong Armenia finished second with 23.2%. Pakistan and Iran say they will fast-track a special economic zone on their shared border and work toward a long-standing goal of increasing bilateral trade to $10 billion. The announcement comes as both countries look to expand economic cooperation following recent diplomatic developments in the region. Our correspondent Mariam Zia reports from Islamabad.
Pakistan and Iran are seeking to turn a historical sensitive border into a gateway for trade and regional connectivity. This is one of the results of the peace deal between Iran and the United States. The area that Islamabad and Tehran plan to develop is known as Ramadan Gap Special Economic Zone, a significant terminal between both countries. During recent talks in Islamabad, Pakistan's Investment Minister Kaisar Ahmed Sheikh and Iranian Ambassador Riza Amiri Muqaddam agreed to accelerate its implementation with the target of raising bilateral trade to $10 billion. Both countries have attempted to forge closer economic and investment ties through border markets and trade links in recent years. However, they had remained at odds due to instability along their shared border. During the recent bilateral meeting, officials discussed a range of practical challenges, including Iranian containers that were stranded at the Karachi port for around 100 days, and a decline in cross-border trade. Before recent regional tensions, an estimated 700 to 800 trucks crossed the shared border every day. Both sides say they want to increase that figure to as many as 2,000 trucks daily. The two countries have agreed to actively promote joint ventures and encourage private sector collaboration. Iran signaled its willingness to expand Pakistan's access to Central Asian markets, while Islamabad highlighted the border zone's location near key ports and shipping lanes. For both countries, the challenge now is whether the political commitments can be translated into sustained trade, investment, and regional integration. Mariam Zia, A News, Islamabad.
Georgia's Prime Minister Irakli Kobakhidze is in Tajikistan on Friday on an official visit, a trip that brings together two countries with growing but still developing ties. The visit comes a month after the two sides held their first Deputy Foreign Minister level consultations in Tbilisi, signaling a push to deepen the relationship. Our reporter Nini Nikolashvili reports.
Georgian Prime Minister Irakli Kobakhidze touched down in Tajik capital Dushanbe on Friday, where he was officially received at the airport by his counterpart, Prime Minister Kohir Rasulzoda. The Georgian delegation traveling with Kobakhidze reflects how broad the agenda is. It includes the ministers of foreign affairs, economy, agriculture, education, and culture. The two countries have recently been focused on strengthening political dialogue, boosting trade and economic ties, and deepening cooperation in education and culture. Tajikistan has expressed clear interest in developing transport links with Georgia, and the two sides have already signed an agreement on international road transport. Georgia's position as a key transit corridor between Europe and Central Asia makes that connection strategically important for Dushanbe. Diplomatic relations between the two countries date back to 1994, but high-level visits of this kind remain rare, making Friday's meeting in Dushanbe a notable step forward in bilateral relations. Nini Nikolashvili, Tbilisi, A News.
Supporters have welcomed the Turkey national football team in San Francisco ahead of a crucial World Cup match. The squad is preparing to face Paraguay as both teams look to recover from opening round defeats.
Football fans gave the Turkey national team a warm welcome in San Francisco on Friday after the squad completed its final training session ahead of its Group D match against Paraguay. More than 100 supporters gathered outside the team hotel, waving Turkish flags and cheering as the players arrived. The team has been training in nearby San Jose under head coach Vincenzo Montella. All players took part in the session, which included tactical preparations for Saturday's match at Levi's Stadium in Santa Clara. The game is a crucial one for both sides. Turkey opened its World Cup campaign with a 2-0 defeat to Australia in Vancouver, while Paraguay lost 4-1 to the United States in Los Angeles. Another defeat could leave either team facing an early exit from the tournament. Montella acknowledged that criticism following the loss to Australia had affected some members of his squad, particularly younger players, but said the team was focused on the challenge ahead.
For me, the team is eager to get back on the pitch. They've felt the pressure a bit. I'll say it again. They are men, not robots. They've felt the strain of what they've perceived as a bit of an overreaction. But I'm confident. The goal is to get them to the match feeling as relaxed and at ease as possible, because I think that's how they'll be able to perform at their best.
The outcome of the next match could prove decisive in the race for a place in the knockout stage, with both teams needing points to keep their qualification hopes firmly in their own hands.
And this concludes our news update for the hour. Thank you for your time and stay tuned to A News for more.